Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I wanted to talk a bit about the potential launch games for the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, as of now, we've only seen the first look trailer for the Nintendo Switch 2, and it's only shown us one game so far, and that game being Mario Kart 9, potentially. It's very unlikely that it's Mario Kart 8 Deluxe like some people are suggesting. It's definitely Mario Kart 9. It looks far better, and taking a look at some little details here and there, you can absolutely tell that this game is running on a machine that is far more powerful than the current Switch. So let's start with that. The most obvious one being Mario Kart 9. Is this game going to be a launch title for the Switch 2? At this point, I feel like it would be a safe bet to assume that it is, because, well, we saw it in the initial trailer to the Switch 2. We've seen what it looks like. This is essentially the first next-gen game Nintendo has actually shown us, from them specifically. This is the first next-gen Nintendo game we've ever seen. And so I think it speaks volumes that this is the game that they chose to show the Switch 2 with. Now, why would they show the Switch 2 with Mario Kart 9 of all games? Well, because of all games, it's an incredibly popular franchise. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the best-selling game in the franchise, the best-selling Nintendo Switch game, and combined with the sales of the original Wii U version, is one of the best-selling Nintendo games and best-selling games of all time. So clearly Mario Kart 9 is a big deal, and Nintendo knows exactly what they're doing, in my opinion, when they decided to show this as the first game that we associate the Nintendo Switch 2 with. So naturally, it goes back to when we first saw the Nintendo Switch trailer back in 2016. And what was the first game we saw with that trailer? It was Zelda Breath of the Wild. And guess what game launched with the Switch a few months later? Zelda Breath of the Wild. And guess which game is synonymous with the Nintendo Switch? Breath of the Wild. So I think it's safe to say that Nintendo is kind of poising this to be in a similar situation. Now the real question is Mario Kart 9 going to be cross-gen like Breath of the Wild? I'm a little iffy on that right now at the moment, but I wouldn't rule it out. There are many reasons why Nintendo may want to bring Mario Kart 9 to the original Switch. And that's simply because, well, the Switch has over 140 million people in its user base, so it only makes sense to have Mario Kart 9 release to get the most sales possible. There is also the argument going around, and I don't personally agree with this argument, but it is going around that Mario Kart 9 does in fact look like Mario Kart 8, just in terms of art style in my opinion, but it does have a resemblance to Mario Kart 8, enough so that people have been suggesting that perhaps this game can be played on the original Switch. It can be ported over realistically, and that part I'm in agreement with. I think it 100% is possible to scale this game back, scale this game down a bit, to be able to bring it to the Nintendo Switch, to the original Switch, but I don't personally think that that's likely. Yes, the game bears resemblance to Mario Kart 8, graphically and art style wise, but when you actually look at the game itself and you analyze it, there are a lot of things here at play that the original Switch simply wasn't able to do. And even at the end of the trailer, that shot where you can see this big vast desert in front of you, you can see that the draw distance has been vastly increased. You can see that the shadows are actually more detailed. There's a bit more detail in the shadows as well, and in the texture of the terrain and everything, and even on the karts, the lighting, the reflections. These are all things that would in fact have to be scaled back for a potential Switch version. I'm not even considering the fact that this game looks huge, right? I mentioned, yes, the scale and scope of everything, but if this one stage is this big, obviously other stages are going to be just as big, if not bigger, right? So they would have to scale back a lot just to bring it over to the original Switch. I don't think it's impossible, which is why I wouldn't rule the idea out. I think there is some merit to the idea that this could potentially be a cross-gen game. I wouldn't bet on it, because again, Nintendo needs to incentivize people to buy this new console, and what better way to do that than with Mario Kart 9. Okay, let's move on to the next game on my list here, and that is another obvious one that I am personally looking forward to the most, a game that I have been anticipating for so long and is probably my most anticipated game ever at this point, and that game is Metroid Prime 4. Now, this game was announced back in 2017, the year the original Switch launched, and it was of course promised for the original Switch, ever since it was announced. That didn't change when it was re-revealed last year in June during the June Nintendo Direct, when it was confirmed once again that it is in fact coming to the Nintendo Switch. But then that last shot gave us a glimpse, and I mean a glimpse, at the release date, which was just a vague 2025. That's all it gave us. That's all the trailer gave us. That's all Nintendo gave us. Immediately, as a Metroid fan, your mind starts to wonder, well, yes, the game is still in development, and maybe they're not sure when it's actually going to launch, but you gotta wonder, is Nintendo setting this game up for a dual launch, for a cross-gen launch on both the original Switch and the Nintendo Switch 2? Similar to the situation we faced with Breath of the Wild. Now, if you remember with Breath of the Wild, that game was initially announced and promised as a Wii U game, and then later on Nintendo's plans shifted a bit, and it eventually became a Switch game as well. But of course it was originally promised for the Wii U, so it still came out on the Wii U. What we could see with Metroid Prime 4 could be similar, a game that was initially promised for the previous generation system, and eventually Nintendo's plans changed a bit, especially with the reboot of the game. The development restarted, and we know all of that whole story. Maybe Nintendo's plans changed a little bit, and they decided to shift some of the development to a Switch 2 version of the game. I think that is incredibly possible. Now, do I think there is also a strong likelihood that this is all just not gonna happen? Yes. And why? Simply because Nintendo doesn't have the biggest track record for these kinds of things. Now, if this was Sony or Microsoft, it would be a different story, but Nintendo simply doesn't do this kind of thing nearly as often. And when they do, as examples, Zelda Twilight Princess from the GameCube to the Wii, and now Zelda Breath of the Wild from the Wii U to the Switch, Nintendo has really only done this cross-gen thing twice. Now, I'm sure there's some smaller outliers here and there, but essentially the point that I'm trying to make is when it comes to the big Nintendo titles, big first-party games, Nintendo has very rarely done the cross-generation kind of thing that Sony and Microsoft tends to do. And another argument that I'll put forward is the fact that when Nintendo decides to do this thing, to do this cross-gen thing, it's usually with hardware that doesn't have as much of a visual power leap, you could say. So for example, the Wii was essentially an overclocked GameCube, right? It was only slightly more powerful than the GameCube, thus it wasn't that hard to bring over Twilight Princess, aside from the motion controls, of course. But visually, Twilight Princess really didn't change that much, aside from a widescreen upgrade, I guess, and also that it was the fact that it was mirrored. But it didn't have a visual upgrade. Nintendo didn't need to put in the extra budget, you could say, to visually upgrade the game, because the hardware itself didn't change much. It was really the motion controls that required the extra tweaking. Now, if you go to Breath of the Wild, it's literally the same situation. You take a game on the previous generation, and you only slightly upgrade it for the next generation, the Switch in this case. But the Switch is only a little bit more powerful than the Wii U. And so when you compare Breath of the Wild side by side between the Wii U version and the Switch version, you're not going to see that much of a leap. It's a little bit more crisp because the resolution has been upped a little bit, but for the most part, Breath of the Wild looks pretty much the same as the Wii U version. So the point that I'm just trying to make here, bringing it back to Metroid Prime 4, is that we're faced with a similar situation here. Metroid Prime 4 is a last generation Nintendo game, or current generation in this case because the Switch is still a current thing. The Switch 2 hasn't come out yet. It's a current gen Nintendo Switch game, and it was promised as such. And because the visual leap, the power jump between the original Switch and the Nintendo Switch 2 is quite massive, especially in comparison to the GameCube to the Wii, and then the Wii U to the Switch, this is going to be a much, much, much bigger leap. And I mean a true generational leap. And therefore, my question at this point is, would Nintendo be willing to put in the extra money, the extra budget, towards a full next generation version of Metroid Prime 4? Is that really realistic to expect? Now, do I want it to happen? Abso-freaking-lutely. But will it happen? History suggests that Nintendo may be a bit more conservative with this kind of thing, so I wouldn't bet on anything right now. I wouldn't rule anything out, is what I'm trying to say. Now, that all being said, I want this to be a launch title for the Switch 2. I want to have a separate Metroid Prime 4 version available on the Nintendo Switch 2, taking advantage of all of the updated capabilities of the console, the visuals and everything. I would like to see a version of Metroid Prime 4 that does these things. Do I think it's possible that it'll be a launch title? Absolutely, and I really hope it is. I really hope it is. Nintendo did advertise Metroid Dread alongside the Switch OLED and kind of closely tied them together. So I think it is 100% possible that Nintendo sees this as potential. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm hoping for the best. Now let's talk about the last game I want to discuss. The last game that I feel is a potential launch game for the Switch 2, and I think that that's Pokemon Legends ZA. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not a big Pokemon guy. I'm not really too much in the know when it comes to Pokemon, but I do know that this is a game that a lot of people are looking forward to, a lot of fans are looking forward to. I know that this is probably one of the most ambitious Pokemon games that are going to come out, at least according to Game Freak. This is a pretty ambitious Pokemon title, so I'm expecting bigger things from this game, or one of those big things to Nintendo Switch 2. I think so. I think it's very likely that this game is being poised as a launch game, or even a launch window game. I'm going to go back to Metroid Prime 4 real quick and say I do think that if it's not going to be a launch game, perhaps it will be a launch window game in which it'll come out a few months after the console itself has come out. I think that could be likely for Pokemon Legends as well. I still think Mario Kart 9 is the more likely option for a launch day game, but a launch window game, I think that Pokemon Legends ZA could be a really good cross-gen fit. Now, why do I think this? Well, first of all, I do think Game Freak has been pretty vague about the details of this game. It's been really quiet on the Pokemon Legends ZA front, so to speak, and so that has people wondering, that has me wondering too, what is going on with this game, and does Nintendo have grander plans for this game? Does Game Freak and the Pokemon Company at large have grander plans for this game? Because we haven't heard about this game in about a year now, right? It's been quite a long time since we've gotten anything about this game, about any kind of update, especially in terms of a trailer. We haven't gotten anything. Now there is going to be a Pokemon Presents in the near future, so maybe we'll get something then, maybe? But I would rule out any kind of Switch 2 news simply because if a Pokemon Presents were to happen, apparently it might happen before the April 2nd Nintendo Switch 2 presentation, so we're probably not going to get that kind of news right there and then. We may have to wait until the April 2nd presentation to learn more if there is in fact going to be a version of the game coming to Switch 2, or maybe just a paid upgrade, I guess. But just the sheer vagueness behind this game and Game Freak's silence and the very vague 2025 release date, again, just like Metroid Prime 4, it really does, in my opinion, lend some credence to the belief that this game could come to the Switch 2 in some capacity. Very likely an actual version, next-gen version of the game. But those are just my brief thoughts on these three games. I know that there's a few other candidates. I know that there's the Professor Layton game that also feels like a good contender, but I feel like I've discussed these three games in too much detail at this point that I don't want the video to go any longer. So I might make a separate video at some point to talk about more potential launch games, but for now we'll just keep it at these three main ones. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the video, guys, and if you did, please consider subscribing, giving this video a like. That would be very much appreciated. Anyways, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.